I learned something. I hope I learned something. I hope I learned something. I hope from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny days. I hope you learned something. I hope you learned something. I hope you learned something from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny days.
Wrong scene. There we go. Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to the daily All Hat, No Cattle News Rodeo. I'm your host, Hat. Upcoming about 2 hours of fun, frivolity, and facts. Not necessarily in that order. And of course, hello to all of you watching on YouTube, Twitch, Trovo, and DLive. Not necessarily in that order. Folks, we've got some breaking news out of the White House. I'll be getting to it in just a moment. And a lot more to cover today. There is a massive whistleblower filing by a couple of people who were federal employees. They're detailees, meaning they're federal employees from different departments who volunteered to help HHS with the children's camp at Fort Bliss. Remember, the federal government put out that request for people to take leave from their regular federal jobs and help on the border and with the different encampments and facilities. Told them they were getting basically paid leave time to do so. Pointing out, of course, how overstaffed our government is to where people could take off their job fully for weeks in order to help out with the border disaster. It's no longer a crisis, by the way. It's a full-blown disaster. There's two of those detailees who have filed a massive whistleblower complaint against Health and Human Services, and I will be reading it in full. So settle in, good folks. There's also news out of Los Angeles that perhaps the homeless encampments may be diminishing. Is it too little too late? And then for the after show, I've got news of a lawsuit that just came out about Jake Gardner. Remember the Kansas City bar owner who was initially cleared of any wrongdoing in a fatal shooting and then was subsequently rung up in front of a grand jury, charged with 3 felonies, and who ultimately killed himself. And there was a lawsuit regarding that. Also, I have an archive opinion from one of the newspapers you would not expect to call out the federal government on their mixed at best COVID policy messaging. And then finally, California and a few other states have banned a particular item that is near and dear to my heart and also near and dear to the BTU production in this room. And I will give you the full details at the end of the after show. But first, we have breaking news from the White House. This is brought to us courtesy of trendingpolitics.com. This is by their Colin Rugg from just a half hour ago. Biden administration ready to impose more lockdowns with C&D recommendation. I'm not kidding, folks. I'm not kidding. This is hot off a White House press briefing. Let me read it to you. During a press conference today, Principal Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre announced that the 46 asterisk administration would be willing to impose more lockdowns if recommended by the CDC. Quote, President Biden says that we are not returning to lockdowns, shutdowns, and school closures, but he also once said that we didn't have to wear masks anymore once we're vaccinated, Fox News reporter Peter Doocy said. Continuing the quote, so why should Americans trust him on that? They're obviously missing the word on. Once again, Peter Doocy doing God's work, at the White House, quoting the press secretary, well, because we listened to the scientists, we listened to the experts. This is a public health situation. This is not about politics at all. This is about saving lives. And this is what the president is all about. He wants to make sure that we are saving lives. If you look at the last 6 months, that's what he's done every day. And you see that in the numbers. Now we're at a point where we have to double down and make it very, very clear to people that we can't let the pandemic win. We have to continue to fight. Peter Doocy continued. So if you're listening to the scientists, if scientists come to you at some point down the line and say, it is our opinion that there should be shutdowns and there should be school closures, would you do that? Here's the answer. Well, we listen to, like I said, we listen to the CDC and the experts and their guidance. The CDC is a body that is very well respected. And again, we follow their guidance. Now, this press secretary, as you can see here, pictured in this tweet from Jason Rantz, she is not known for being quick on her feet. Just saying. So I'm expecting the White House to try to fully backpedal from this. But the damage is done. The damage is done. And I'll be really interested to see how they dig themselves out of this. Looking at the chat, Electric Doug says, I don't recognize the CDC as a valid agency of any kind. Scully says, corporations are at odds with the new lockdown instructions. It's being tossed around that work at home may be coming back soon. Yep. Scully also says it's still unsettled whether companies could be responsible for the death of an employee from the spread of COVID-19. As I understand it, there is no law on the books. I've heard this mentioned several times, both yesterday and today. There is no law on the books that says you can't force someone to get vaccinated. I'm not saying it couldn't be created and challenged. But as it stands right now, you have that right as any person who has authority over your building. That's the way I understand it. Now, again, this flies in the face of the Nuremberg Code, but the courts aren't recognizing that as of now. We'll have to see how things shake out. But as of now, I don't know that any employer would be on the hook for a reaction from an employee. I don't. It would be a matter of tort law, and I really don't know anything about tort law. I do know we need tort reform, but we're probably going to see it, but we're going to have to wait for it. Someone's going to have to die before this happens. That's all there is to it. That's it. All laws are written in blood. Yeah, that's true, Draw. There's no law that says you can't force someone to be vaccinated. I've heard that on several very authoritative sources over the last 24 hours. I don't know about that. I don't know exactly about HIPAA, but think about it. Your children have to show vaccination status to go to public school in pretty much every state in the union. So it looks like that is being extended to vaccination status for adults. So again, there could be challenges coming up in the courts, but so far there's no legal leg to stand on that I've seen. Dog asked, what about your basic right to be left alone? Unfortunately, that flew out the window when the Democrats took over, Dog. I'm sorry to say. Once the ruling class took over, that's gone. That's gone. Skullcram does point out you have to pass a drug test. That's exactly correct, sir. That's exactly correct. So I don't see how requiring proof of a vaccine would be any different. What I want to know, though, is what about people who have acquired immunity after a prior infection? We're finding out that natural immunity is longer lasting than the Pfizer vaccine. According to some Israeli numbers, the Pfizer vaccine wears off after about 4 months, 6 months. And you may require boosters. That's preliminary data, but that is being discussed. So we'll have to see. But anyway, that's word from the White House as it is right now. They promised no more lockdowns during the campaign, and currently they lied. All right. Let us move along then to our first Babylon Bee bookend of the day. Let's pick one really good for the one on the left. Let me refresh it here to get the latest ones. Oh, here we go. Perfect. First one. This is from their life section. Study finds, 97% of statements following, quote, experts say, are completely made up. And we have a photo here of a number of people in business attire with a young man with a nicely trimmed beard holding a tablet, and his name tag says, hello, I am a expert, written in bold marker. Dateline US. In a groundbreaking study of over 328 million statements given by experts over the last 10 years, researchers discovered that 97% of those statements were totally made up. Quote, according to our research, whenever you see the phrase experts say, followed by some truth claim, you can be 97% sure that that statement was literally pulled out of thin air or maybe sometimes out of someone's butt, said Dr. Smagbord Lujborjan, an expert. Quoting again, as it turns out, there's really no agreed upon criteria for what qualifies someone to be an expert. As a result, we have a ton of self-proclaimed experts who don't know what they're talking about. That's my expert opinion anyway, but I'm a real expert though. Close quote. The study found that 43% of experts are actually a few fries short of a Happy Meal, while the other 54% qualify as a few beers short of a six-pack. Said Lujborn, I don't know how to pronounce Swedish names. None of them are the sharpest knives in the drawer. Close quote. Experts were quick to criticize the survey, claiming the report had not been peer-reviewed by a qualified panel of experts. Experts insist that in spite of the study, anyone who refuses to listen to experts is probably a big stinky doo-doo head, that's a quote, and they probably hate science. They insist that they know what they are talking about, and you should keep listening to everything they say. Babylon Bee, everyone. All right, moving to my personal conceit, the market. A bit of a pullback after a strong midday climb. The market showed slightly up ticks today. The Dow closing outside of record territory again, closing up at 0.44% at 35,084 and change. It was in record territory at one point today. I find it fascinating that these numbers are as good as they are, considering the GDP report that came out. And I've got that coming up. I cannot believe that it is anywhere near in black or green on the Seeking Alpha territory at this point in time. I just can't believe it. The big winners today, however, are gold and crude oil. Gold surging well over the $1,800 an ounce at $1,828 and change, up almost 1.2%. And crude oil up almost a full 1.6%, currently at $73.53 per barrel of West Texas Intermediate sweet crude. Bitcoin is seeing a bit of a pullback from its earlier trends, currently well below 40,000 at 39,642 and change per coin. That's down almost, a little over 0.8% from its previous mark. But it is still well above where it was just a week ago. Okay, so I have something for you here. I apologize, the audio may be a little off at first. I completely forgot to meter this. It's been a really, really weird day here today. I had to get a haircut, and it took forever. I just couldn't get in for some reason. So it really threw off my prep time. And by the way, I would like to say, yes, a big hello to Uncle Bobbity. We have missed you, good sir. We have certainly missed you. Always a great addition to the chat. But Dog brought this to my attention earlier today, that the 4Gs, as they are known, powerhouses from Congress, went to the detention center in D.C. where the January 6th political prisoners are being held. I'm going to use that phrase from now on. And they were turned away. They were turned away. So they held a press conference afterwards. As you can see here, they're right off the lawn from the Capitol. All four spoke, but I don't have time to play everybody. So I've queued it up to when Representative Matt Gaetz, Republican Florida, comes up to the microphone, and I'll play his part of it. So sit back and enjoy. I have not previewed this at all, so I'm going into this cold.
Every day in America, people are locked in prison. It's not every day that people are locked out of a prison, which is what happened to multiple members of Congress today. We have two principal responsibilities: to appropriate funds and to conduct oversight. How does the Biden administration expect us to participate in the representative republic when they deprive us of access to information that would inform our oversight work and our appropriations decisions? The questions we've asked have gone unanswered for months, and they fall into two principal categories. First, are there defendants, as a consequence of their conduct on January 6th, being deprived of access to potentially exculpatory evidence? We have seen that the FBI has a history of animating criminal conduct. That is precisely what happened in Michigan, and it may be what happened on January 6th as well. To answer that question, we need access to the 14,000 hours of videos that Congressman Gosar has continuously called for. To answer that question, to get that evidence, we sought a meeting with the Attorney General. We went to the Department of Justice, and we weren't even allowed in the lobby to have a meeting with an Attorney General who still to this day has not shown up for an oversight hearing before the Oversight Committee or the House Judiciary Committee. What is Merrick Garland hiding? The second category of concerns deals with the specific treatment of detainees. To get answers, we did what members of Congress normally do. We showed up at the facility and sought a tour. This happens for Republicans under Democrat administrations, it happened for Democrats under Republican administrations, and now there is an unprecedented effort.
This is a full 3 months of food without needing any refrigeration or special storage. And you're looking
to deny members of Congress information that relates to criminal cases and that relates to the treatment of people that are held. We are not members of Congress who will go away. And so if you are out in the country and you believe that you are mistreated, targeted, abused, singled out as a consequence of your politics and your lawful activity, know this: we will continue to fight for you. I now hand the microphone over to my colleague, Congressman Good.
All right, we'll pause it there. By the way, in case you didn't notice this, I'm sorry, you can't see. It's not on your screen. This is on the Right Side Broadcasting Network YouTube page. I have decided to subscribe to RSBN, not just follow, but subscribe. And I would suggest any number of you who could see parting with $5 a month to do the same. RSBN is doing God's work, and I do try to support as many of these conservative and independent news gatherers as possible. Of course, while you're at it, if you'd like to sign up for a subscription on the DLive channel, for me, hey, why not? But I would just assume you think about spending it on RSBN. They do a lot more than I do. So that is a lot going on there. And I would like to thank White Fox Liz for not only her generosity, but her time with us. Thank you so much. And also, of course, welcome to Inquirer. Nice to see you in the DLive chat. All right, moving right along then, good folks. So, as I teased at the opening of the show, what was the market looking at when it decided to go up today? Because the news ain't good for the economy, folks. The one thing buoying up markets right now that I can see is the fact that the insanely overblown quote-unquote infrastructure package that is for some reason being given the patina of respectability by some idiot Republicans in the Senate, that may be the one bright spot on the market's horizon. But certainly economic growth in this country ain't it. And I've got it right here for you. This is an archived shot of CNBC page from this morning, written by Jeff Cox. The title says it all. U.S. GDP rose 6.5% last quarter, well below expectations. The GDP rose at a 6.5% annualized pace in the second quarter, according to the Commerce Department's first estimate. That was well below the Dow Jones estimate of 8.4%. Initial claims for unemployment insurance also missed expectations, with the 400,000 total above the 380,000 expectation. That pretty much says it all. Look at these numbers here. You can see the dip and then the massive drop last year from March and April. And then as the lockdown started to ease under Trump, there was a massive explosion. And then there was a fallback during the final quarter of last year due to the resurgence of the virus. And then Biden took over, and it's barely climbed over that mark. The last two quarters have been just a little bit above fourth quarter under Trump's term. These are horrible, horrible numbers. We had everything in place for a massive comeback from last year. Trump talked about it all the time, the V-shaped recovery, he called it. And initially it was exactly that. Everything was on autopilot for Biden. And then he blew it. He started spending like a drunken sailor. He hasn't done yet by a long shot. There's some rumblings from Kirsten Sinema, Senator, Democrat, Arizona, but she's not going to vote for the quote-unquote $3.5 trillion budget package that they want to force through reconciliation. Many economists are saying it looks more like a $5.5 trillion package when you actually lay it out over the spending terms they're talking about. Now there's more in this story. Gross private domestic investment fell 3.5% as declines in private inventory and residential investment held back gains. Rising imports and a 5% decline in the rate of federal government spending, despite the ballooning budget deficit, were also factors, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. The overall increase came thanks to increasing personal expenditures, which rose 11.8% as consumers accounted for 69% of all activity. Folks, that is untenable. Sooner or later, people run out of money. People are ravaging their savings from last year. And with prices up, all of this spending pretty much just chases less and less value. There's some really, really sad numbers about savings numbers. I believe I have it further down, or I've got it right here, actually. First, let me finish this paragraph. Non-residential fixed investment, exports, and state and local government spending also help boost output. Here's the bad part. The personal savings rate dropped sharply, tumbling to 1.97 trillion from 4.1 trillion in the previous period. Savings have been ravaged by over $2 trillion. So all of this private domestic, or I should say personal expenditures, that can't last forever. So let me look a little further through this here. Let me quote Paul Ashworth, chief U.S. economist at Capital Economics. The good news is that the economy has now surpassed its pre-pandemic level, but with the impact from the fiscal stimulus waning, surging prices weakening purchasing power, the Delta variant running amok in the South, and the saving rate lower than we thought, we expect GDP growth to slow to 3.5% annualized in the second half of this year. That is horrible. That is absolutely horrible. We should be seeing 7.5%, 8.5%, 9% GDP growth. Also, with unemployment, continuing claims edged higher to 3.27 million, according to data that runs a week behind the headline number. The total number of those receiving benefits rose by nearly 600,000 to 13.16 million, according to data through July 10th. None of that is good, folks. None of that is good. By the way, I saw another article. I don't have it pulled up. Retail new auto prices. The average price for a new car now is $41,000. The sticker discounts that you're used to getting are gone. People are paying retail price, MSRP price on the floor, and in some cases even a extra cherry on top of that in order to get a car off the lot. With the semiconductor shortage, the chip shortage, they just can't produce the cars at the rate to meet demand. Auto lot inventories, are dropping with no replenishments in sight anytime soon. And the used car market has gone up just as much. So if you need a car now, you're going to pay through the nose. You might want to consider Uber. Dog says in the D-Live chat, fighting a war is the only thing that can save us. That kind of dedication. White Fox Liz asked the perfect question, who can afford to buy a new car? Well, obviously no one in the next quarter, because savings are gone. We've wiped out over $2 trillion in savings. You can't get that back. Not with an economy that is struggling and job numbers that are struggling like we are seeing. By the way, Saturday, eviction moratorium is off. Watch last night's Timcast, pardon me. Watch last night's Timcast IRL with Jack Prosobiec to get a really interesting insight on what could be happening with the ending of the moratorium on I just forgot what I said. Evictions. Man, my brain. Now, there is a rumbling from the White House that they may try to extend the moratorium, but they don't have the authority. The Supreme Court ruled, not a federal court, pardon me, ruled that the CDC does not have the authority to extend or even create moratoriums on anything like evictions or loan payments, things like that. They don't have the authority. So I don't know where any type of further security blanket for people not paying their rent, whether or not they can afford it. I don't know where that's going to happen. But something's going to break this weekend. Friday, I should say. Something's going to break Friday. So keep your eye on that. Okay, so I teased this. Let me read you the headline here from the Daily Wire by Hank Berrien. Whistleblowers accuse Biden Health and Human Services, quote, efforts made to downplay the degree of COVID infection at migrant children's site. Okay, so that's the headline. Let me read you the actual complaint, and I'm going to read you this in full. I'll skip the addressees, but this is regarding second protected whistleblower disclosures of gross mismanagement by the Department of Health and Human Services at Fort Bliss, Texas, causing specific dangers to public health and safety. And this is from, by the way, the Government Accountability Project, a nonprofit, and this is how it reads. And I'm going to read it in full. This is from yesterday. To whom it may concern. This is Government Accountability Project's second protected whistleblower disclosure concerning abuses and mismanagement at the Fort Bliss Emergency Intake Site, or EIS, operated by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, or ORR. This letter supplements our first disclosure, dated July 7th, 2021, detailing harm to unaccompanied immigrant children caused by ORR and its private contractors' gross mismanagement. A copy of the July 7th letter is attached as Exhibit 1. Okay, here we go. Evidence from additional whistleblowers. We now represent Arthur Perlstein and Laura Reinhold. They are career federal civil servants who served as volunteer detailees at the Fort Bliss EIS from April through June 2021. They are also whistleblowers. Mr. Perlstein is the Director of Arbitration and of the, at the Office of Shared Neutrals at the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, or FMCS. Ms. Reinhold is an attorney advisor at the Social Security Administration, or SSA. Mr. Perlstein was posted to Fort Bliss for 2 months between April and June 2021. Ms. Reinhold, 1 month, May 2021. Mr. Perlstein was primarily assigned to work on 2 teams while at Fort Bliss, performing clinical assessments on the clinical assessment team and working with small groups and individual children on the mental health wellness team. Ms. Reinhold worked in the girls' tent for the first half of her detail, and during the second half was on the call center team and worked in all tents. Okay, first of all, let me point out, these people are high-level federal employees who have, according to their titles, 0 experience in child care. Now, we predicted this back in February, when we learned that the government was dropping requirements for anyone working with these kids to have to submit to an FBI background check and a fingerprinting. They completely waived that. About the same time, they sent out a federal employment, wide notice, asking for anyone to take a leave of absence from their job and work at one of these centers. And obviously, these two people did just that. So they certainly had the best of intentions. They were not getting extra pay for this, if I remember correctly. This was just paid leave. There was no bonus on top of that. So they did this out of the goodness of their hearts. Nobody goes to Fort Bliss because they want to. It is not known as a vacation site. Trust me. Okay. I'm already seeing ServPro. We talked about them last time. I'm already seeing it. Okay, let me get into it. More about Fort Bliss private contractors, ServPro. In our July 7 disclosure, we described the dominant roles played by private contractors, in particular ServPro, which staffed the dormitory tents for boys and girls. ServPro is a company specializing in helping individuals, organizations, and communities recover from disasters. Childcare is not among its portfolio of services. Following our July 7 disclosure, ServPro told the media, quote, "When we became aware of this issue, no childcare experience, we immediately advised the franchise operator that these are not approved ServPro service offerings. We have been informed by the franchise operator that it is no longer providing these services through the ServPro franchise." Close quote. This seems to be ServPro's way of saying the franchisee and its employees continue to work at Fort Bliss, just not under the ServPro brand. Let me take a drink here. In any event, we have since obtained additional information about other private contractors who played significant roles at Fort Bliss and other EISs. Like ServPro, they appear to have no background in childcare. Moreover, like ServPro, it appears that these contractors were hired without going through any bidding process such as ordinarily required under the federal acquisition regulations applicable to federal contracts. Chinega Corporation. When the federal detailees arrived at Fort Bliss in April and May, Chinega was the contractor most spoken of. According to its website, Chinega Corporation is an Alaska Native Village corporation which, quote, figures prominently in the diverse government services contracting marketplace supporting defense, intelligence, and federal civilian customers, close quote. In other words, a diversity hire, make good company. That's my interdiction. That's not in the article. Pardon me, in the complaint. Continuing. The four units are environmental health care and facilities, military intelligence and operations support, professional services, and security. Chinega appears to have no childcare experience. In April 2021, Chinega had primary responsibility for all case and tent management. They were also given responsibility for the clinical mental health program and other functions. However, in May 2021, ServPro staff replaced Chinega staff to monitor the children in the dormitory tents while Chinega continued its other activities. ServPro tent managers falsely assured detailees that the company was involved in this type of work in various parts of the country. According to our client, it was not clear which contractor, Chinega or ServPro, was less suited to the work. It appears neither had experience with it, nor did they perform competently or appropriately. Contractor employees told detailees that to get their jobs, they did nothing more than submit basic employment applications. There was no follow-up or vetting process, no interviews, or even phone calls prior to being offered their jobs and asked when they could start. Ms. Reinhold further reports that she learned during the last week of May that Chinega and ServPro staff on site were only then undergoing background checks en masse. Apparently, these checks were not done earlier before they started to work around children. Rapid Deployment Incorporated. While Chinega and ServPro had significant roles at Fort Bliss, the lead contractor appears to have been Rapid Deployment Incorporated, or RDI. Like Chinega and ServPro, RDI has no child care experience. According to its website, RDI specializes in base camp deployment and related support. Reportedly, RDI initially received two large contracts totaling $614 million to manage the Fort Bliss EIS. $600 million for one facility, folks. One facility. And that's just one of the contractors. Continuing. According to usaspending.gov, the official source for spending data for the U.S. government, contracts awarded to RDI for this work have since been extended and modified so that obligations to RDI will total around $1 billion. Prior to this engagement, it appears that between fiscal year 2008 and 2019, RDI was awarded government contracts in only 3 of these fiscal years in annual amounts not exceeding $13 million, a small fraction of the Fort Bliss obligation. Our clients report that RDI was unknown to virtually all the detailees at Fort Bliss, other than to a few who briefly dealt with RDI employees who staffed an operations trailer. Organizational chaos. We provide here additional information about gross mismanagement, gross waste, and abuse of authority at the Fort Bliss EIS. Domination by private contractors. According to our clients, private contractors, not federal employees, were essentially in charge of virtually all functions. Detailees were frequently told that their main mission at the facility was to pave the way for contractors to take over the operation and that they were essentially there to assist the contractors. Federal detailees witnessed significant waste, fraud, and abuse. When they attempted to express their concerns to federal managers, they were told, time and time again, it was the contractors that were in charge and government employees needed to be responsive to the contractors' needs. The contractors ignored or rejected most detailee concerns. For example, the shortage of underwear and other clothing for children has been widely reported. The problem persisted for weeks and months. Countless children reported these shortages to detailees. Boys said they had no underwear at all, while most simply had only one pair with nothing to change into. Detailees insisted that the children be supplied with underwear. Each time the answer was that shipments had not come in. Whenever detailees brought it up, they were told it was the contractor's responsibility. Detailees, private contractors, and managers were well aware of the problem. At one meeting, a Chinega manager told detailees, quote, "We are aware there is a shortage of underwear, socks, and shoes, and management knows." Close quote. Abdication by federal managers. Compounding private contractors' failings, federal employee managers, time and time again, failed to act. For example, detailees, including Mr. Pearlstein, suggested to senior federal management that underwear and other supply shortages could be promptly solved by purchasing needed supplies at nearby El Paso discount stores like Walmart and Costco. Many of the detailees held management and purchasing positions in their home agencies and were holders of federal business credit cards. Mr. Pearlstein, who had frequent contacts with children, suggested using detailee federal cards as a stopgap. Detailee could purchase supplies on their cards and then be reimbursed. But a senior federal manager rejected the suggestion out of hand, saying, quote, "I don't have time for this shit." Close quote. Mr. Pearlstein was then immediately transferred to another position. Management provided no explanation. This happened with other detailees too. In another disturbing instance, construction workers lewdly and loudly gawked at girls as they walked outside to the meal tent. Detailees were shocked at these acts of sexual harassment. They attempted to report the incident. Managers resisted taking their complaints. Notwithstanding the dismissive attitudes of federal management and private contractors, a great many federal detailees out of their own pockets collectively spent thousands of dollars on supplies for the children. Mr. Pearlstein and Ms. Reinhold personally spent hundreds on books, visual aids, games, and other items for children, as well as markers, tape, and other organizational supplies unavailable in the tents. Other detailees contributed far more, some individually into the thousands. Let me read that again. A great many federal detailees out of their own pockets collectively spent thousands of dollars on supplies for the children. Wow. Misallocation and mismanagement of resources. By mid-May 2021, almost 800 federal detailees were assigned to the Fort Bliss EIS. Folks, think about that. 800 people on furlough from their actual federal jobs, basically monitoring an encampment of UACs, unaccompanied children. If you need 800 detailees, how many kids are there? Because we don't know that number. They won't release those numbers. Most of the time, we don't even know where these kids are, much less how many of them are there. The few numbers that we've gotten were pretty much at or more than capacity of the places we were told they were at. All right, continuing. However, our clients report there was virtually no effort to assign these detailees based on their skills and experience, which were considerable. It appears that no one ever reviewed the resumes and applications submitted by the detailees. Detailees with very relevant expertise were not matched to appropriate positions, resulting in both underutilization of talent on the one hand and employees assigned to work for which they were not qualified on the other. In addition to impairing the mission, this involved considerable waste since, on top of substantial travel expenses, many of the most accomplished and valuable detailees were being paid six-figure salaries to essentially babysit or perform basic clerical tasks. To make matters worse, leadership and management positions were handed out to detailees without any reasonable basis. Decisions regarding who to put in charge appeared only related to who got to the facility first. No effort was made to place later arriving employees, trained and experienced in management or leadership functions, or in the operations of child emergency programs, in positions of authority. The result produced teams of skilled and experienced detailees led by unskilled and/or inexperienced managers. The result was also a mess. Here are a few examples. The EIS Clinical Assessment Team, or CAT, worked directly with the children to assess their history of abuse, their mental and emotional health, and their exposure to sex or labor trafficking. Detailees with no relevant skills or experience populated the CAT. They did their level best, flagging those who required special attention. They interviewed and assessed over 5,000 children. That's in italics, folks. Over 5,000 children. Remarkably, only after all this did management decide most of the team members, including the CAT director, were not qualified to do clinical assessment and needed to be reassigned. So that may be saying that that's not all the kids. That they finally decided after they were partway through that the results weren't up to par and they needed to change personnel. That's one way of looking at that. Also, a detailee fluent in Spanish and with considerable experience working with children as a licensed clinical social worker was initially assigned to be simply a, quote, line of sight observer in a dormitory tent. It was weeks before the detailee was reassigned to provide counseling support for distressed children. Other detailees were identified as organizational management, legal professionals, and/or communications specialists. Their talents went unused. They too mostly worked as line-of-sight observers or clerical aides. Even when such skilled professionals observed systemic problems in their daily work in the tent and suggested policy or process changes, they were essentially treated as ignorant meddlers. There's more to this, folks. Poor planning and miscommunication. Planning was haphazard at best. Policies and leadership decisions changed constantly, sometimes within hours. Examples include: management repeatedly told detailees that within days, all girls would be transferred out of the Fort Bliss EIS to other facilities or placements. Management then reversed themselves, first telling detailees the transfer plan was a rumor, and then saying there would be no transfers, only to reverse back and confirm the transfer plan, and later, yet again, to announce there was no such plan. In mid-July, was Anthony Fauci in charge of that? In mid-June, the Fort Bliss detailees were told that they were going to be sent home early. They were told that they would depart in 3 waves, with the last ending in early July. Detailees then scrambled to change travel and other plans. Days later, the detailees were told, quote, "Our objective changed," unquote. The second and third wave demobilizations were put on hold. That's a quote as well. Additional failures in case management. Let me take another drink here. In our July 7 letter, we disclosed one horrific incident when 48 children who had been told they were going home were pulled out of the bus line and sent back to their tents. Our clients now report this was not an isolated incident. On multiple occasions, groups of children who were told they were going home and had already arrived at the airport for a flight out were suddenly told it was a mistake and brought back to the facility. Indeed, on at least 2 occasions, children who had already boarded airplanes were forced to get off. Detailees on the team to which Mr. Pearlstein was assigned comforted the shocked and distressed children when they were returned to Fort Bliss. Oh my God. That is exactly analogous to telling someone you're getting out of prison. Here are your street clothes. Here's your wallet. Walking them out the gates. And when they get in the car to drive away from the prison, yanking them out and saying, nope, change of plans, and putting you back in your cell. That is exactly the same thing. And you're doing that to a kid who is in a foreign country, who has lived in miserable conditions for probably weeks, if not months. That is beyond inexcusable. That is flat-out child abuse. Beyond anything they've done up to that point. That is incredible, incredible psychological abuse. Continuing. Mr. Pearlstein and Ms. Reinhold personally spoke to dozens of children who had been at the Fort Bliss EIS for more than 30 days. Remember, 72 hours, folks. That's the holding limit. 72 hours. Many had been there approaching or even exceeding 60 days. A great many had not spoken to their case managers in over a month. Some were not told they had been assigned a case manager at all, even after many weeks. Most had no information about the progress of their placement with sponsors. The Fort Bliss children did not and could not trust that they were safe, that their basic needs would be met, or that their sponsorship placement cases were being timely processed. The most frequent complaint heard from children was that they were in a state of total uncertainty and anxiety with no idea of what to expect next. My God, the trauma. The absolute trauma. Healthcare failures. COVID was widespread among children and eventually spread to many employees. Hundreds of children contracted the Chinese Communist Party virus in the overcrowded conditions. Adequate masks were not consistently provided to children, nor was their use consistently enforced. Every effort was made to downplay the degree of infection at the site, and the size of the outbreak was deliberately kept under wraps. At a, quote, town hall meeting with detailees, a senior U.S. Public Health Service manager was asked and refused to say how many were infected because, quote, if that graph, speaking of infections, is going to the Washington Post every day, it's the only thing we'll be dealing with, and politics will take over, perception will take over, and we're about reality, not perception. Close quote. All the manager would acknowledge is that several children had to be hospitalized. The manager also dismissed a detailee's concern that the children in the COVID tents were wearing basic disposable masks instead of N95s. The manager said N95 masks were unnecessary for the infected, even though uninfected detailees were working with the infected children. In response to a question about a shortage of lice kits, remember when we were told that there was nothing to worry about because DHS was providing the most high-quality anti-lice mattresses to all of the facilities? I guess Fort Bliss didn't get the memo. Let me start over. In response to a question about a shortage of lice kits, the manager said that it was not a problem because there was no significant presence of lice. When it was pointed out that the spread of lice was so serious that a girls' tent with hundreds of occupants was on lockdown due to lice, the manager's flippant remark was that girls tend to have long hair, and so obviously they would be more subject to getting lice. I've had lice, folks. In my school, we had 2 lice outbreaks within a year. It's not fun getting rid of lice. I don't know if they still use it, but back in the day, we used something called RIT, and it smells like kerosene. Man, my internet's dropping all of a sudden. Okay, it's coming back. That was weird. It never does that. I'm almost out of time here, and I'm... all right, it's decent. It's stabilizing. Anyway, but it's called RIT, And it smells like kerosene. And you have to have someone go through your hair with a very fine comb to comb out what they call the nits, which are the eggs that lice lay. And it takes forever. And normally you have to get your hair cut really short. Back then, at least. Continuing. Mismanagement and significant mental health issues. What, there's more? Major depression and depressive episodes were commonplace among the children. Mr. Pearlstein personally interviewed or worked with dozens of children who had symptoms of serious depression, including some who expressed suicidal thoughts. Many of his colleagues did as well. In many instances, suffering children were referred to, quote, counselors, other detailees. Some had relevant skills. Others had no prior training or experience. They did their best under the circumstances. Of even greater concern, mental health clinicians, specifically employed by a private contractor to deal with referrals from across the facility, appeared to lack appropriate training and experience. Children told detailees of their experiences when unhelpful clinicians ignored their concerns or told them not to worry. I have to interject. When my bipolar first started popping up, I was in my 20s, as is often the case. Sorry, I was in my 30s. My bad. I was in my 30s when it really started kicking in. And initially, I was treated for depression, which is, of course, the exact worst thing you can do for someone other than ignoring it with bipolar. And one of my coworkers said to me, I swear to God, said to me, maybe if you just smiled more. Sounds like these kids got the same treatment. They also told, back to the complaint, they also told of making requests to tent staff to see a counselor or clinician and being ignored or denied. Mr. Pearlstein reports that in one case, a clinician's primary response to a boy who had complained of feeling very depressed and sad was to tell him that he had nothing to complain about and that, in fact, he should feel grateful for all he was being given. Many, if not most of the children Mr. Pearlstein interviewed, if they had been at the facility more than a few days, told him they felt like they were in prison and often begged, quote, please get me out of here. I don't know if I can take it anymore, close quote. In some cases, children tried to escape the facility. Folks, Fort Bliss is in the middle of nowhere. There's a town nearby, but a kid can't get there on foot. It's been a while since I've been to Fort Bliss, so perhaps the town has grown since then. But remember, it was an Air Force base. They don't want a lot of civilian buildings around a secure military facility. Kind of beats the whole idea of having a secure facility. So, kids trying to walk out, that is desperation beyond belief. Let me back up. In some cases, children tried to escape the facility. Children sometimes became understandably angry and irritable when denied such basic items as clothing, undergarments, and shoes. More about the dormitory tent conditions. Here's a picture of one of the tents right here. Let me blow it up for you. This is from the BBC from June of this year. Remember, the BBC is one of the few outlets that's done any actual reporting on these camps. I don't see any chairs in that at all. That's nothing but beds. And those aren't even beds, those are cots. There are no mattresses. That's just stretched canvas over a frame. Wow. All right. More about the dormitory tent conditions. The Fort Bliss dormitory tents housed as many as 1,200 children. During May and June 2021, there were roughly 10 dormitory tents housing between 500 and 1,000 children each. Okay, here's a caption. That's the boys' dormitory tent interior. Hundreds of beds, undivided space. All right, continuing. Our clients add the following. The overall environment of the vast airplane hangar-sized tents was overwhelming. Staff and detailees were often vying for space or resources. The noise frequently made it hard to carry on a conversation or run activities for the children. Reports of bullying were common, and detailees were not trained on what to do. Toward the end of May, there were riots in some of the boys' tents. Ms. Reinhold witnessed security contractors surrounding a tent during one incident. Detailees were never briefed about the riots or trained on how to act in the event a riot broke out. Filth was commonplace. According to one Chinega senior manager, quote, "I've been into one tent one time and I was like, yeah, I'm not going back there. They're filthy. They're dirty. There's food on the floor. There's wet spots all over the place. The beds are dirty." Close quote. Cleanliness conditions varied day to day. Crowding caused trash and dirty laundry to accumulate. The situation was far worse because of the dust that settled everywhere after El Paso area summer dust storms. Remember, folks, this is basically in the desert. You may not have ever been to El Paso, but it is a desert. I have been there. I've driven through El Paso, and I've flown into El Paso several times. Continuing. Like the children, the federal detailees were in a similar state of anxiety and uncertainty. They tried to make changes and solve problems when possible, but the situation was out of their control. They could not reasonably provide assurances to the children that they would be released to sponsors or family as soon as possible, as legally required, or even that their basic needs would be met in the meantime. Complaints to management were often met with dismissal or retribution. With the mobilization, detailees left the Fort Bliss EIS with serious concerns about the welfare and safety of the children who remained and who would be housed there in the future. Secrecy and good news only were standing orders of the day. Detailees were frequently reminded that everything at Fort Bliss was confidential. This ensured no effective oversight or accountability. Especially noteworthy was the fact that the identity of the federal contracting officer responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts handed out to the private contractors was never provided to the detailees they repeatedly asked. Yet perversely, the detailees were also told that the contracting officer was the only federal employee authorized to bring any significant issues to any Fort Bliss private contractor. In other words, other than the useless suggestion box discussed at length in our July 7 letter, detailees had no internal recourse. That's the perfect catch-22. By the way, a great book. You've got to read that book. An incredible book. Joseph Heller's second book, which came decades later, not so good. Good as Gold, not so good. But it's an incredible book. Not a bad movie either. Really interesting movie. Great performance by Arlo Guthrie. Really terrific performance. But Catch-22 is, in the book, you have to be crazy to continue to... It was an Air Force base in Italy during World War II. And the Air Force kept upping the number of combat missions you had to fly in order to rotate out. It was initially 25, and it kept going up. I believe it went up to 40 or 50 at one point. And so the complaint was, I can't fly combat missions anymore. I'm going crazy. So you would apply for basically what they would call Section 8, which in the military is a mental deferment. And they were told, well, you have to be crazy in order to get out of your combat missions, but since you know that it's dangerous to fly the combat missions, you're not crazy. Catch-22. And that's exactly what this is here. You can only complain to the contracting officer, but we're not going to tell you who the contracting officer is. All right, back to the letter. Complementing the penchant for secrecy was management's reflexive aversion to bad news. For example, regularly, when detailees reached the end of their term, a sheet was passed around with detailed instructions from HHS Public Affairs Office on how, when asked, to make everything sound positive about the Fort Bliss experience and to play down anything negative. At an all-hands meeting called to address the winding down of detailees serving in the dormitory tents, detailees spoke up to express concern about leaving children with only unskilled contract staff. Reportedly, the incredulous response from site leadership was the cynical suggestion that detailees wanted to stay on to earn more overtime pay. Wow. Wow. We're paying those people overtime? I didn't know that. That's even more insane. Federal benefits. These people are high-level federal employees, a lot of them. Overtime for them is through the roof. All right, finishing up. The information provided by Mr. Pearlstein and Ms. Reinhold corroborates and goes beyond the reports from our other federal employee clients who volunteered to help the unaccompanied children warehoused by ORR at Fort Bliss and elsewhere. Their information further reveals violations of law, rule, and policy, gross mismanagement, gross waste of resources, abuses of authority, and specific dangers to public health and safety. For all these reasons, we ask you to continue to investigate the matter. Very truly yours, David Z. Seide, or Side, I'm not sure, Government Accountability Project. Carbon copy, Cindy Wang, Director, HHS Office of Refugee Resettlement. And this was also supplied to members of the House of Representatives, Committee on Energy, Commerce, Committee on Oversight and Reform, U.S. Office of Special Counsel, the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, Government Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, and the OIG for the Department of Health and Human Services. I am horrified. Absolutely horrified. I did not get a chance to read all of this. So a lot of, majority of that was brand new to me and went beyond anything we had talked about previously, including the July 7th letter that I touched on briefly. This is beyond horrific. This is everything we were worried about for these kids and more. That part about putting them on a plane and then taking them off and shoving them back into one of those tents, that is horrifying. That is horrifying. If an airline did that, you'd sue them. In fact, it happens all the time. And these kids have no recourse whatsoever. They're not even citizens. Uncle Bobbity says in the D-Live chat, no one would put up with kids or adults breaking and entering their homes, yet it is compassion to let exactly that happen to America. Yeah. So there's some discussions regarding Fort Bliss, it looks like. I'm just scrolling up on the chat. All right, well, that ends it for YouTube. We went long today, folks, but you got an earful, so enjoy it. Take it to heart. Let's see if YouTube allows us to stay up. So YouTube, I am now turning off your stream and moving on to continue the show on DLive, Trovo, and Twitch. You're more than welcome to join us there. The links to DLive and Trovo are on the screen there. You can also, if you don't want to use your browser, find them on their apps on your iPhone or Androids. They're great apps. I especially like the DLive app. Very robust, very well done. Trovo, I don't know so well, but I understand it's pretty good too. And otherwise, remember, YouTube demonetized me months ago, so I don't get anything out of them except hopefully drawing people to my other channels. So please consider that. In the meantime, YouTube, maybe I should be back tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you care to join us tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Eastern, I'll be continuing my playthrough of Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. We're about to go back to the Bard's College and give the news about returning the ode regarding the Mad King, and hopefully getting the effigy ceremony back on track. So with that said, bye YouTube.